Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're doing something a little different. We're pulling back the hospital curtain. Using the published diaries of a former junior doctor, Adam Kay, we're going to look at the profound realities of clinical life. We're going to unpack the true and honestly often hidden human cost of healthcare. As you'll see, we're diving into exactly what happens on the front lines and how all those little micro-traumas can accumulate over a medical career.
So what happens when the people caring for us can no longer cope? To answer this, we need to trace a very specific journey. We're going to follow a doctor's timeline, from those frantic, optimistic early days of their career all the way to a frankly devastating breaking point. It's a journey that reveals how systemic pressures quietly but relentlessly accumulate on the shoulders of individuals.
Let's start with Phase 1, orientation and chaos. In the opening months of clinical life, young doctors are defined by this overwhelming orientation to the hospital wards. It's like being thrown into the deep end. They are immediately flooded with repetitive, rapid-fire tasks. Bloods, cannulas, observations, and prescriptions. It's a period of intense urgency where you basically just have to learn by doing. And on a steep learning curve like this, mistakes aren't just academic. They are immediate, practical, and deeply felt. Nowhere is this more evident than in the accident and emergency department. The cognitive load here is simply staggering. Just imagine trying to manage multiple bays simultaneously, desperately waiting for absent seniors, all while making provisional, high-stakes triage judgments without even having the full information. It's an incredibly stark reality of the mismatch between the resources they have and the sheer volume of patients.
So, how do they cope with this immense pressure? Well, clinicians often develop a very specific survival mechanism: gallows humor. Now, it is absolutely crucial to understand that this isn't a mockery of patients. Not at all. It's a psychological shield. It's really a language they're forced to adopt just to survive the unpredictable, sometimes completely absurd trauma they have to witness every single day.
Moving on to Phase 2, the labor ward.
In obstetrics, the stakes reach their absolute peak. It places clinicians in intimate proximity to patients during their absolute most vulnerable moments. Because of this, doctors experience these jarring emotional swings, sometimes within a single shift. They'll oscillate between the pure exhilaration of an uncomplicated birth, a literal miracle, and the gut-wrenching terror of sudden medical disasters, like fetal distress or maternal collapse. The emotional whiplash is just profound.
These aren't just bad days at the office. These are traumatic episodes that haunt staff long after their shift ends. They act as emotional fulcrums. And the really heartbreaking part is that even when everything is done correctly, entirely within the bounds of a doctor's training and resources, the burden of these tragic outcomes gradually and irreparably changes their relationship with medicine. Which brings us to Phase 3, the slow burn of burnout.
As day shifts bleed relentlessly into night shifts, the job quietly erodes private life. Sleep deprivation becomes this central organizing force. We're talking fragmented sleep, cognitive fog, social isolation. Those missed birthdays and failing relationships, they aren't accidental oversights. They actually become integral, guaranteed costs of the profession. These private losses accrue so slowly, deepening the emotional weight carried by the staff without anyone really noticing until it's too late.
And this leads us to a really crucial concept: moral injury. Accepting unsafe hours just to avoid abandoning your colleagues isn't just physically tiring, it inflicts deep psychological harm. When schedules are made with little regard for human safety, clinicians are forced into repeated ethical compromises. They stay late to try to fix things, to hold the system together, and that takes a devastating internal toll. Next is Phase 4, institutional culture and blame. Compounding all of this sheer exhaustion is a rigid institutional hierarchy that often just normalizes the immense stress. When systems inevitably buckle under pressure, adversarial investigations can actively re-traumatize clinicians. It forces them into this anxious calculus of disclosure and guilt, causing them to internalize the responsibility for adverse events, even when the system itself has clearly, undeniably failed them.
The harsh reality the source highlights is that the vast majority of medical tragedies are produced by systemic failures. We're talking severe understaffing, exhausted rotas, and administrative deficits. It's rarely a purely personal clinical error made by an individual doctor. The environment literally sets them up to fail.
And that brings us to Phase 5, the breaking point. Eventually, the sheer weight of it all culminates. In the source diaries, the tone shifts dramatically right around here. that self-deprecating humor thins out entirely and raw grief takes over. The difficult decision to leave the medical field is framed not as a personal failure or some lack of resilience, but as a necessary act of survival. It's portrayed as the only logical response to an environment that continuously demands far more than a human being can sustainably give. When that humor finally drops away, we are left with this incredibly stark reality. Clinical competence is practically irrelevant without the invisible, exhausting emotional labor of the workers. The entire system relies on their personal sacrifice, their emotional regulation, and their relentless microsocial work just to keep functioning day to day. Finally, Phase 6, a plea for reform. In its conclusion, the diary transforms from a personal memoir into an urgent plea for structural reform across the healthcare system. The source makes it clear we need safer rotas, protected rest, transparent investigations, and real investment in staffing. Treating burnout requires fixing the system through large-scale structural changes. We can't just keep pointing fingers and telling individuals to somehow be more resilient in a fundamentally broken environment. So I'll leave you with this final thought to ponder. Will policymakers and the public recognize this? And more importantly, how can we redesign our systems to ensure that the people who dedicate their lives to caring for us are not destroyed in the process? Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and I hope this provided you with a clearer understanding of the true cost of care.